And yet, no one ever did. His house never locked its doors. No one was ever punished. And yet, no one ever left. Not because they weren't allowed to, but because wanting to leave felt like betrayal. By the time Elias understood what was happening, his sister no longer imagined a future outside that house. This isn't a story about abuse. It's about something quieter and far more effective. This is how a family teaches you to disappear without ever raising its voice. The house had rules long before anyone called them rules. They were never written down, never explained. They were simply understood. No raised voices after dinner, no locked doors, no questions asked twice. Elias Morin grew up believing that was normal. His parents called it structure, stability, a calm household. Other families fought, other families broke. The Morin house never did. Elias's father, Victor, was gentle in a way that made people listen. He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. When disagreements happened, he waited. Silence always worked in his favor. Elias's mother, Clara, smoothed everything else. She reframed conflict into concern, disappointment into worry. "We just want what's best for you," she said often. And it always sounded true. Elias didn't remember being punished as a child. He remembered being disappointed instead. That was worse. As a teenager, he learned quickly which thoughts stayed inside, which opinions were too sharp, which emotions created a look on his father's face that ended conversations without a word. The house rewarded agreement. Not loudly, comfortably. Elias left for university at 19 and felt the relief immediately. Noise, chaos, people disagreeing without consequence. It felt dangerous and alive. He didn't go back often. Not because he hated home, because home had a gravity to it. It pulled you back into orbit. When his father fell ill years later, Elias returned without hesitation. Temporary, he told himself, just to help. The house hadn't changed. Same furniture, same quiet evenings, same unspoken expectations. But Elias had. He noticed things now. How conversations steered subtly away from certain topics. How family members checked Victor's reactions before finishing sentences. How disagreement was met not with anger, but with concern. "You seem tense," his mother would say. "You should rest." Rest was the word used whenever someone pushed too hard. Elias's younger sister, Mara, still lived at home. She was calm, measured, careful. Too careful. At dinner one night, Elias asked casually if she was still planning to move out. Mara froze, just for a second, then smiled. "There's no rush," she said. "Things work better when we're together." Victor nodded approvingly. Elias felt a flicker of unease. Later that night, he asked Mara quietly in the hallway, "Do you still want to leave?" Mara hesitated, then whispered, "I don't think about that anymore." Not, "I don't want to. I don't think about it." That was when Elias began to understand. The Morin house didn't forbid freedom. It trained people not to imagine it. And Elias had returned right on time to remember how that felt. Elias stayed longer than he planned. Not because anyone asked him to, because leaving required a conversation. And conversations in the Morin house never ended where they began. The first week passed quietly. Too quietly. Victor's illness was real, but it didn't slow him. He moved through the house with the same deliberate calm, pausing before answering questions, letting silence do the work it had always done. Elias noticed how often meals ended without conclusions. Topics were opened, gently explored, then allowed to dissolve before anyone committed to a position. It felt considerate. It wasn't. Decisions were being postponed indefinitely, until the desire to decide disappeared. Mara barely left the house. When Elias asked where she'd been working lately, she shrugged. "I'm helping Mom more," she said. "It just makes sense." Sense was another word the house used often. Anything that made sense didn't need justification. One afternoon, Elias overheard Victor speaking softly to Mara in the living room. Not instructing, reflecting. "You always used to want so much," Victor said. "Remember how restless you were?" Mara laughed nervously. "I guess I grew out of it." Victor smiled. "That's growth." Elias felt something twist in his chest. Growth shouldn't feel like shrinking. That night, Elias tried something simple. At dinner, he disagreed. Not aggressively, just clearly. "I don't think it's healthy for Mara to put everything on hold," he said. "She deserves her own space." The table went still. Clara reached for Mara's hand. "You're just worried," she said gently. "That's sweet." Victor didn't respond immediately. He waited. Then, "You've been away a long time, Elias. Things feel different when you're not used to them." The disagreement was reframed as distance, not content. Elias pushed a little harder. "I'm saying she shouldn't feel obligated to stay." Victor nodded slowly. "No one is obligated." The conversation ended there. Later that night, Clara knocked on Elias's door. She sat on the edge of the bed like she used to when he was a child. "You sounded upset earlier," she said softly. "Are you sure you're okay?" Elias almost laughed. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shown anger, but expressing a boundary had been registered as distress. "I'm fine," he said. Clara smiled. "You don't have to protect us from your feelings." That sentence stayed with him, because he wasn't protecting them. He was protecting Mara. Over the next days, Elias noticed how often his words were echoed back to him, altered. He'd say, "Mara needs independence." Later, Clara would say, "Elias is worried Mara might feel lonely." He'd say, "She should make her own choices." Victor would say, "Elias is afraid of family closeness." The meaning shifted, not denied, translated, until his concern no longer sounded like concern at all. Elias checked Mara's phone one afternoon when she left it on the counter. No messages from friends, no job applications, no plans, just reminders, family dinners, doctor appointments, household tasks. Her world had become very small. That evening, Elias asked her directly, "Are you happy?" Mara paused, then answered carefully, "I'm content." That word again. Content. Satisfied with less. Elias realized then what the Morin house did best. It didn't argue against freedom. It made freedom feel unnecessary. And the more Elias pushed, the more the house responded. Not with force, but with concern, which was far more effective. Because you can fight control, but it's much harder to fight care. Elias stopped confronting them directly. That was a mistake. He thought distance would give him clarity, that if he observed quietly, the pattern would reveal itself fully. It did. Just not in the way he expected. The Morin house didn't escalate when challenged. It absorbed. Elias noticed how quickly tension evaporated after he spoke his mind. No arguments, no raised voices. Just a careful return to normalcy, as if nothing uncomfortable had been said. That normalcy was the tool. Victor began spending more time with Mara, not controlling her schedule, sharing memories. He spoke about the past in a way that framed staying as loyalty and leaving as abandonment. "When your mother and I struggled," Victor said once, "family was the only thing that stayed." Mara listened quietly. Elias watched her nod. Clara, meanwhile, adjusted her language around Elias. She stopped disagreeing with him openly. Instead, she worried aloud. "I'm just concerned you're carrying too much responsibility," she said. "You've always been the strong one." Strength became the problem. Responsibility became the burden. Anything Elias did to protect Mara was reframed as self-sacrifice he didn't need to make. One evening, Elias found an old box in the attic. Photos, letters, old journals. He wasn't snooping. The box was labeled with his name. Inside were things he didn't remember being saved. Drawings from childhood. Notes he'd written when he was angry. A journal entry from when he'd first left home. "I feel guilty for wanting more," it read. Elias sat down hard. They had kept it, not as memory, as evidence. That night, he asked Victor directly, "Why did you keep my things?" Victor didn't hesitate. "Because people forget who they were when they're upset," he said calmly. "We wanted to remember for you." Remember for you. The phrase chilled him. The next day, Elias suggested something concrete. He offered to help Mara look for an apartment. Just browse. No commitment. Mara smiled politely. "That would be stressful," she said. "Mom worries when plans change." Elias turned to Clara. "You do?" Clara looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, I don't worry," she said. "I just notice when others do." Responsibility floated back to Elias. Always Elias. Later that afternoon, Elias overheard Victor on the phone. His voice was low, measured. "She's calmer now," he said. "Yes, much better than before." Elias realized with a jolt that Victor wasn't talking about Mara's future. He was talking about her state. Calm was the metric. Not happiness, not fulfillment. Calm. That night, Elias confronted Mara again. "Do you still want to leave?" he asked. Mara hesitated longer this time, then said something that froze him. "I don't want to disappoint them. Not, I don't want to go. I don't want to disappoint them." Elias understood then. This family didn't forbid independence. It attached consequences to desire itself. Wanting something else meant hurting someone, and hurting someone meant being ungrateful. Elias packed his bag that night, quietly. He planned to leave early. No discussion, no explanations. At dawn, Clara caught him in the hallway. She looked at the bag, then at him. Her voice was soft. "Running away again?" Elias stopped. "I'm leaving," he said. "There's a difference." Clara nodded slowly. "I just hope you're not doing this because you feel guilty staying." Elias felt the familiar pull, the inversion. Leaving was framed as guilt, staying as love. Victor appeared at the end of the hall. He didn't speak. He just watched, waiting, as he always had. And Elias realized the final truth. The Morin house didn't need to stop him from leaving. It only needed to make sure that wherever he went, he carried the weight of coming back. Elias left before sunrise. No note, no goodbye. He closed the door softly, as if volume itself might trigger another conversation. The road away from the house felt longer than he remembered. Not physically, emotionally. Each step came with a familiar weight, the quiet expectation that he would turn back once the feeling passed. It didn't. Weeks went by, then months. Elias built a life that didn't orbit around careful pauses or translated intentions. He spoke freely, disagreed openly, let conversations end unfinished. At first, it felt wrong, unsafe. Then it felt real. He called Mara often, at least at the beginning. Their conversations were gentle, shallow, carefully pleasant. "How's home?" he would ask. "Peaceful," she always replied. That word again. Peaceful. One evening, Elias received a message from his mother. Just a photo, the family table, dinner set, one chair empty. No caption, no accusation, just absence. Elias didn't respond. Days later, Victor called. His voice hadn't changed. "We're proud of you," he said. "We just hope you're not punishing yourself by staying away." Elias closed his eyes. The old reflex stirred. To explain, to reassure, to soften. "I'm not staying away," Elias said calmly. "I'm just living." There was a pause. Then Victor said quietly, "Living doesn't have to mean leaving." The sentence lingered long after the call ended. Months later, Elias learned that Mara still hadn't moved out, still helped at home, still delayed plans, still described herself as content. But something had shifted. She no longer spoke about the future at all, as if naming it might disturb the calm. Elias visited once, briefly. The house was unchanged. Same silence, same softness, same gravity. They were kind to him, careful, as if he were fragile. During dinner, Victor asked gently, "Are you happier now?" Elias thought before answering. "I'm clearer," he said. Victor smiled. "That comes with time." Elias realized then that clarity had never been the goal of that house. Comfort was. Comfort that asked nothing. Comfort that absorbed desire. Comfort that taught people to shrink their wants until they fit. When Elias left again, no one followed him to the door. They never had to, because the Morin house didn't chase people. It waited. And waiting was its strongest skill. Years later, Elias would sometimes feel the old pull, the urge to soften a disagreement, to carry someone else's disappointment, to stay quiet for the sake of peace. But now, when that feeling appeared, he recognized it, not as love, as conditioning, because love doesn't require silence, and care doesn't ask you to disappear. The Morin house still stood, still calm, still intact. Everyone inside it believed they had chosen to stay, and that was the final, quiet truth Elias carried with him. The most effective control doesn't look like force. Years later, Elias would sometimes catch himself mid-sentence, about to soften a truth that didn't need softening, about to apologize for wanting space, about to explain a boundary as if it were an inconvenience. The instinct appeared quietly, automatic, as if someone else were still listening. He learned to stop when it happened, not always successfully, but often enough to notice. Once, during a disagreement with a close friend, Elias felt the old reflex surge, the urge to retreat, to make the tension disappear, to restore calm at any cost. He paused, and for the first time, he didn't choose calm. He chose honesty. The conversation didn't collapse. The friendship didn't break. Nothing terrible happened. That realization stayed with him longer than the argument itself, because it contradicted everything the Morin house had taught him. That peace was fragile. That conflict was dangerous. That love required careful containment. Elias began to see it everywhere after that. In other families, in friendships, in relationships that called control concern, and silence respect. He recognized the signs instantly now. Conversations that never reached conclusions. Care that arrived only when someone stepped out of line. Affection that tightened when independence appeared. The most unsettling part was how familiar it all felt, how reasonable it sounded. Elias thought of Mara often, not with anger, with worry. He wondered if she ever noticed the shape of her days narrowing, if she ever felt the weight of expectations without knowing where they came from. He never pushed her anymore. He had learned what pushing did. Instead, he stayed present, available, a quiet counterweight. One evening, years after he left, Mara sent him a message. No context, just a question. "Did it take you long to stop feeling guilty?" Elias stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Yes," he typed, "but it stopped being guilt once I understood where it came from." She didn't reply. Not that night, not the next day. But the question itself mattered, because questions were dangerous in that house. They had always been. Elias closed his phone and sat in the quiet of his own space, a space that didn't ask him to be smaller, calmer, or easier. And he understood something then with absolute clarity. Control doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it lowers it. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it teaches you to mistake comfort for safety and silence for love. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is leave a place that never once told them they had to stay. It looks like home. Years later, Elias understood something the house never said out loud. It didn't teach obedience. It taught hesitation, not fear of punishment, fear of disappointing someone you love. That fear followed him long after he left. Into conversations, into relationships, into moments where silence felt easier than honesty. That's how the house survived. It didn't need walls. It lived inside the people who grew up there. The Morin house still stands, still calm, still polite, still full of people who believe they chose to stay. And that's the most effective kind of control, the kind that never tells you what to do. It only teaches you what not to want, because force creates resistance, but comfort creates loyalty. And loyalty is much harder to escape. If this story felt familiar, it's probably because houses like this don't look dangerous. They look like home.